All right, well, thank you so much to everybody for coming along to this afternoon's webinar. Before we get started with the main webinar, I'd like to just deliver an acknowledgement of country. So we'd like to acknowledge and show our respect to the traditional custodians of this land, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, who hold the memories, traditions, culture, and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, for it's on their land that we learn and share our knowledge. Thanks again, everybody, for coming along to today's session. I'm Sophie O'Keefe, and I'm the General Manager of Operations at English Australia. We also have with us today from English Australia our new staff member, Rachel Winton. So Rachel is our new Professional Development and Communications Coordinator. Welcome, Rachel. Rachel joins us with a long history of English language teaching, experience in ELICOS teaching, and also a background in design, photography, and events management. It's great to have you joining us at this webinar, Rachel. And now I'd like to introduce the presenter of today's session, Petar Stojanovic. So Peter is the Director of Studies at Trobe College Australia, which is in Melbourne. And Peter actually presented this session at the 2024 English Australia Conference in Perth, where it was really well received. And so we invited him to represent the session on a national stage so that we could share it with more people. So today, Peter will be talking about the Teachers' Individual Development Framework at La Trobe College Australia, which is a novel approach to teacher development, and it prioritises student-centric values such as psychological safety, belonging, and care. So thank you once again, Peter.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And I'd also like to extend a welcome to Rachel. So welcome aboard, Rachel. We're all looking forward to working with you. I'm sure our members are, looking forward to meeting you at upcoming chapter meetings and no doubt at the conference later this year. So welcome to everyone. Just before I launch into it, just a little bit of housekeeping. You'll notice down the bottom of your screen, there'll be a Q&A function. There's also a chat. I'd preference if you could use the Q&A function for any questions. I will sort of keep an eye on it throughout the talk, but by all means, we'll dedicate a bit of time toward the end of the session to go through some of those questions together. So at any time during the presentation, please feel free, if anything sort of pops up, just pop your question in the chat and we'll take a look at it together. So my talk is entitled Transforming Teacher Development, and as Sophie mentioned, so I gave this talk last year at the English Australia Conference in Perth, and a few weeks ago, toward the end of last year, at an EA function in Victoria, in Melbourne. So for those of you from across Australia, I'm really pleased to be able to have you listen to my little dog and pony show. So thank you all for joining. I'd also like to echo Sophie's acknowledgement by acknowledging that we as English language teaching professionals recognise and respect the continuing living cultures of our First Nations people, the languages of our lands, and the significant role in communicating the stories now and into the future. All right. So that's me. I'm Peter, and as Sophie mentioned, I am at La Trobe College Australia, which is located in Melbourne on the grounds of La Trobe University. Teachers' Individual Development Framework, or introducing this framework, was a project that started, I want to say, well before I joined La Trobe, actually. It was something that throughout my career, I'd interacted with lots of really talented ELICOS teachers throughout my career, and gleaning from each one, the sum of our experiences is what we make of them, right? So being able to, I guess, capture what I thought were the best elements of English language teaching. Oftentimes we find ourselves in, I say this reflectively as a director of studies, we find that experience is something that creeps up on us without our knowledge, I guess, or without, the consciousness of that happening. And throughout those sort of years in the industry and years, with really talented teachers, I've been able to glean a lot of great, um, tips, I guess, if you will, that I've sort of formulated into a framework. So I wanted to start off by problematizing. So understanding a problem that's not too uncommon among all of our teaching contexts. And I'll start off by starting with the 4 Fs. So if anyone's never heard of the 4 Fs before, don't worry. It's not something like, oh, I've got to go back to my Scott Thornbury books and figure out what that is. Don't worry, it's not from there. So the 4 Fs is actually something quite recent. And it's something, if we liken it back to our recent history with going online, then going blended and hybrid and back to face, and then hybrid and lockdown and locked out, and all of those different things that we experienced over the early part of the 2020s. The 4 Fs is really the impact that these kind of uncertainties had on us as educators and as humans. So we suffered with these 4 things. The first was frozen. So with all of the uncertainty surrounding us, with all of the things that were changing constantly, lots of fear came into it. And so we froze. It's kind of like one of the fight or flight responses to significant and upheaving change. So we all froze and we didn't really know what to do, or we couldn't do what we wanted to. And so we just stopped and everything stopped. And in a way that extended on to things like PD. Now, PD and teaching and learning doesn't just stop. Those things need to continue because, we are continually educating our students and working in that capacity. So we froze, we were fearful, that's the second F. We became forgetful. I know this one sounds a bit funny, but often kind of minor level trauma, it can happen to people where we forget, or we start to forget some of the basic elements of what we do in a regular day or a regular, class, for instance. We know that, you walk in and you say good day and then you start talking about the goals of the day, but then there's some elements in there that you're like, oh, hang on, didn't I used to do this, or what did I do? So forgetful was one of the Fs. The last one is also an F, and I'm not going to say that one, so I'll say fed up. So fed up is, I think, the nice G-rated alternative to that one, but I think you're all nodding and smiling going, yeah, I remember that. So we were fed up. So living through unprecedented times meant that the world and our teachers needed to shift. That level of adrenaline for really sustained periods of time had an overall detrimental impact on the well-being and motivation of our people. So in some ways, you could say the fundamentals were eroded. And so in a way, we needed to go back to square one in order to rebuild confidence, resilience, and foster motivation. Therein, the TIDP. So I've called the TIDP, or TIDF rather, is the Teachers Individual Development Framework. And this is a framework that I implemented at La Trobe about just over a year and a half ago, I want to say. So it's been, although it's took its roots earlier on in my career, it's something that I was able to begin soft implementing from about a year and a half ago, and we're underway in that process. So what is it? So the framework itself affords for basically a way to support teaching staff to be effectively guided and encouraged and motivated throughout their teaching careers. The aim of it and the purpose of it is to establish a professional development aims to have a clear sense of what success can look like as a teaching staff member. The aim to forge a custom of professional and personal enrichment as well, and development, recognizing and supporting talent and growth, and afford a means through which career growth and development can occur. So essentially these were, some of the byproducts, or I guess the essential benefits that this program would mean to have. Okay. The other important element of it is revisioning performance to development. So many of us here work in organizations. Actually, all of us do. Unless we're our own Cracos registered business of one person, we work with others. And essentially, we have that. That custom, I guess, of working in corporations or organizations. And with that comes a whole host of formalities, all of the elements that having a job require. And one of them is performance development reviews, for example. This is something that typically most people will do a couple of times a year, and you go into a room and you sit with your line manager and you say, yeah, these are the things I've done. And yeah, you gotta meet expectations, needs improvement, exceeds. Well, this language is sounding familiar to everyone, I'm guessing. Um, Now, the key thing that is missing from that is the actual work of what teachers do. So I'm feeling through the Wi-Fi that everyone's kind of nodding, going, yeah, that sounds about right. Um, Now, performance development frameworks oftentimes are designed for non-academic staff. So you might have to consider, for instance, by what percentage your sales grew or how much more accurate your account keeping and record keeping was. But when it comes to teaching, the actual work of teachers, the dynamism and magic of what happens in the classroom with the student, and before that, for that matter, in the design of the courses and afterwards with the care, um, actually is an entirely different beast. And it's difficult to measure in terms of performance. How well did you teach? You know, that's yes, you can walk out of a classroom and say, yeah, that teacher was great, or that one was a bit not great. Or even yourselves, you walked out of a classroom and thought, I could have done that one better. But what is it that actually you could have done better, or how can you articulate that? So I propose that because of the very nature of teaching being development focused and iterative, that rather than focusing on as a performance element or dynamic, it should be focused on as development. I assert that the perspective of teaching performance should be looked at through this development lens, um, because exactly for that reason, the PDR frameworks tend to be more generalist in nature and suit the differing departments within an organisation. And for that reason, I've proposed this more nuanced approach to the development of teaching staff here in the TiDF. So it is comprised of four pillars. So these four pillars are observation, goal setting, one-to-ones, and student surveys. And I'll go into each one of these facets in a little bit more detail for you now. So let's start off with student experience surveys. So before I go ahead of myself, every single one of us, every single person that's deigned to crack open a textbook, get a whiteboard marker, walk into a classroom and teach an Alakos class, knows that our students for at some point throughout their journey will complete a survey. Now, the case at the Trobe and many other places that I've worked, in fact, they ran things called SETs, or student evaluations of teachers. Yes, I know, I can hear the groaning and the eye rolling through the Wi-Fi ether, don't worry. So the point is, with student evaluations of teachers, there are some issues with that, and I'll explain them now. One of them is that it puts the onus of evaluating a teacher onto a student, and using that data to give performance feedback. Yes, it can be helpful and it can be rich. However, think about it, a student by nature is a non-expert at teaching. That's what we've spent our hours and hours doing, perfecting. That's what we spent our CELTAs doing, or our MT Sols, or whatever course it is that we've done. That's all of those hours of reflection that we've put in. So the expertise, putting that in the hands of the student, isn't a responsible, I guess, methodology, I believe, for garnering valuable feedback. The other, I guess, negative byproduct is that it can create a culture of complaint. If you're a student, just think about it. You're handed a sheet to say, rate your teacher from 1 to 5. How good were they at this? How good were they at that? Then that sort of psychologically automatically gets, particularly non-native English speaking students, or learners of English rather, the sort of in the mind frame of saying, oh yeah, that teacher wasn't very good. And it's not to say that we don't want to draw attention to whether it was good or bad. It's more the fact that the why is missing. It's just based on student perception, for instance. And so culturally, it was important for me to start to make a shift in that area. So I introduced the student experience surveys. So changing the, I guess, ideology of what informed these questionnaires that we were giving our students, because we are required to give them, but changing the actual nature of the questions behind them to incorporate things like belonging, to incorporate things like psychological safety. We all went through a period where we needed to wrap our students in cotton wool a bit, as you know, and so being able to imbue these surveys with that, I guess, worldview was helpful in being able to garner more valuable feedback about the students. What the students are experts in is their experience, and that's what we can get feedback on. So just to revisit some of my bullets here for you. So the idea of the SES was to replace the outmoded sets, to take a more holistic focus on the student experience rather than the student's feedback on an individual person. To understand demonstrable elements of care, safety, and belonging. So, how are those things being imbued into the way that we deliver education? It is generic, so it is more experience focused, but it provides ample opportunity for verbatim feedback that we can relate to different facets of teaching. It provides a rich understanding of the student experience and it supports with understanding development elements. So I'll show you a sample of some of the questions. These have since we've graduated onto, more advanced versions of these, but this is the original SES that we launched back at the end of 2023. So I'll draw your attention to a few things. Course experience, class experience, teacher experience. So rather than effectiveness, we're looking at things like the experience that the student has had with those different facets of their education. So their course, their class, and their teacher. Imbuing elements of care, safety, and belonging into those questions. So, for example, I know who to ask if I have questions. I've received a good level of support. I feel comfortable talking to my teacher. I feel better prepared for my future studies. So these are the kinds of questions that students can give us more richer feedback on. And also providing lots of opportunities for verbatim feedback. So what did you like most? Is there something you'd like to see improved? Any other comments? Like those kind of opportunities to provide more feedback. And students, that once that kind of trust element is developed through demonstrably saying we care about you, we care about your safety and your belonging and your psychological safety, a student is more likely to want to open up to us and say, well, actually, I feel, my class could be like this, or I don't feel like I get along with my classmates. That's the richness of what's happening in that educational space. Um, when this process is completed, and it takes not very long to conduct, and we all conduct surveys, and they can take however 5-10 minutes, whatever it is in each class. It allows for us to produce a one-page scorecard. Now, these scorecards, I call them scorecards because it's just basically a page with metrics, but I don't want you to consider it as, oh, this goes to the teacher. Oftentimes, this goes to a group of teachers if you have co-teachers. So it's actually the student's experience of that class. So if you're looking at intermediate A or intermediate 1 or level 3.1 or level 3A or whatever the naming convention is at your college, you're able to give an experience rating for that class. So it might be a little bit too small to see, but for instance, right down the bottom, overall rating 4.32. So it's out of 5.0, and it, Likert scale of questions that a student can answer, agree, disagree, strongly disagree, that sort of thing. So that's based on the traditional survey elements. The other benefit that this format of surveys brings is being able to produce a report findings. So in crunching all of that data, we can start to look at, okay, well, which elements did we rank highly on across the board? What are we doing really well at? which ones did we rank a bit lower on? Was it our students' sense of safety? Was it our students' sense of preparedness? Was it that they felt the materials were lacking or boring or what have you? And this is where we can get really rich feedback from. And iteratively, as those things start to be addressed, you can start to transform the questions into the next issue du jour. This example document also so I produced this report with kind of two halves. So one is looking at the quantitative information and the other is the qualitative. So the quantitative is, of course, those Likert scale ratings where we're able to see, okay, well, this percentage or this proportion of our students found that, the teachers were demonstrating a really high level of safety and care, and I felt cared about. And these were the issues, for instance. In the verbatim feedback, we do we I guess, code that data by frequency of unique mentions. So in an example is when students were uniquely mentioning that, what was it again? The vending machine on level 1 is broken and it has been broken for 2 weeks and nobody's fixed it. So this came up about 17 times in one of our surveys. What I found, and you'll find this quite funny as well, is that not a one of those 17 or the other 200 students that were enrolled at the time for that matter went to our student services to let them know the vending machine is broken. And it sounds like a silly thing and you're like, oh, but that's got nothing to do with their education. It does. It's a facility. It's something that's meant to be available to them, but they didn't feel the safety or comfort or, I don't know, the need to go up to our student services desk and say, oh, the vending machine's broken. We need to get bottles of water during break times. It's a silly thing, but it's an important thing. And we're able to garner feedback from students through that. But also, it allows for a feedback loop. So when we code all of this data and look at in the sense of, okay, well, the students had, this problem with the vending machine, or they felt like they didn't focus on speaking enough, or they needed more assistance with diacritic spelling and punctuation, we're able to roll that into feedback that we can implement in the upcoming cycle or term. Typically what we do at La Trobe on the first day of classes, we have a welcome event or a welcome back event. So it's welcome for new students, welcome back for those that are continuing with this. And there we can say, we have a session. You asked, we listened. So I remember quite happily standing in front of a group of students on their first day of the new term and saying, thank you so much last term for doing the survey. We got some really valuable feedback. You mentioned that the vending machine on level 1 wasn't working. It's now fixed. So you asked, we listened. Now, again, sounds like a silly, simple thing, but it's important to those students. And hearing it from us to be like, you said something, we valued it and incorporated it into our way of doing things. It became quite a useful thing. And our students developed more and more trust and more confidence in being able to approach us with other sorts of feedback. And that's when we got to know that, we have a learning support area where students can book in for individual support. The complaint was that we don't have enough times. There are not enough booking slots. We introduced more. So, we're able to really pinpoint what's happening at the time and support the students in that way. I'll shift on to observations now. So all of us, anyone who's ever taught has been observed. Most of us have observed others. And I want to sort of go back to the basics of, if you remember every single one of you doing your pre-service teaching qualification, whether it be CELTA or your teaching degree or whatever it was, you had the opportunity to observe and be observed. And oftentimes as later career teachers, those opportunities become fewer. My belief is that observation throughout one's career doesn't necessarily have to happen every week or every year or every 3 years for that matter, but when you're wanting to garner that feedback, it's useful. So through the TiDF, we conceptualized 3 tiers of observation: unobserved, embodied, and peer observation. So unobserved observation is the first port of call. So this is actually reflection dressed up as observation, I guess, if you like. So we provide this pro forma where teachers are able to go in and through this guide actually look at all the elements of their class and reflect on their own, I guess, delivery, performance, or development rather, throughout that space. Before I get into this, the embodied observation is something that I do, or our coordinators, or directors, or studies, or AMs, or head teachers, whatever the naming convention you use at your college, is typically an informed friend that's able to come in without judgment and observe. And then peer observation. So peer observation is being able to see other teachers teach, which we quite rarely get to do. So the observation template that I've devised has some important facets. The first is the class profile narrative. So through this area is where we narrativize who it is that we have, who are the humans that we have before us. What is our gender mix? What's our nationality mix? What is our ages? Are we made up of a mix of, domestic, international, migrant, Middle Eastern, Southeast Asian, like what is the mix of students? And that's not to classify, but it's just to note because it is an important part of the narrative of the students that you have. The next facet is illustrating the active learning strategies. So what active learning strategies took place? Now, we all have a curriculum, we all have our textbooks, we all have a plan for what we're teaching that day. However, how did you breathe life into the words on that lesson plan page into the 3D situation that happened in front of you? So, were you using a Kahoot quiz? How did you engage those students? What elements made the students do X, Y, Z? So it's important to articulate, for a teacher to articulate, what did we consciously do to bring that curriculum point to life? Another point which will harken you all back to your CELTA days is noticing teacher talk time. Now, it's not noticing teacher talk time as a consequence or as a thing like, oh no, you need to get that down. I remember back in the CELTA, they'd say, you need to do the 80-20 rule where 80% of the time the students talking. That doesn't always work, and we know that. For many of us in academic English classes, it's probably closer to 50-50 or 60-40 at least. However, it's not to judge, but just to notice. Let's bring back noticing. Everyone knows noticing from Scott Thornbury, so let's revisit that concept. And in this little matrix here, at 5-minute intervals, jot down an S or a T for who's speaking at the time. Is it the student or the teacher? And if it's both, S and T. Really, the point is that in the reflection after this unobserved observation, to look back and say, okay, well, who was doing the bulk of the communicating in that class? And then to think about why. The last aspects are reflection and reflexivity. So reflection, we allow space for reflection. We do this as novice English language teachers, but it seems to creep away from us as we go through our careers. So adding in that dimension of saying, okay, well, how was it and what did we do? Sort of gives us back, the opportunity to reclaim that reflection, reflective practice. And lastly, I've added reflexivity. So reflexivity is essentially understanding one's own beliefs and experiences and how they shape what happens in the classroom. So understanding the entity of the teacher and what your thoughts, beliefs, and ideologies are that inform the way that you deliver education and what impact that has on the students thereafter. One-to-ones, we all have them. The way to make them effective is to incorporate the opportunity to look at these observation feedbacks and the student experience survey feedback. So we can look at a combination of those two things to glean feedback from those and incorporate those into one-to-ones. So yes, we provide the feedback, but also it's an opportunity for you and your line manager, your coordinator, your head teacher, whatever it is, to keep abreast of emergent issues, phenomena, and trends. Okay, we're noticing that X amount of students tend to be arriving late, or these students are having trouble with spelling, or this particular cohort is X, Y, Z. So essentially, it just gives us that real-time feedback loop of understanding what's happening. From a human perspective, we've all been through working through screens, and we're currently communicating through one, and it's not to diminish it in any way, but we need to maintain those touch points. I felt like I used to communicate more with people throughout COVID because we were checking in on each other. So it reignites that. Well, now that we're sort of back in this, this 3D environment without, ESOS coming back mid 23 and being fully embodied. But we've started to incorporate in workplaces the opportunities of being able to have a work from home day or time release or whatever your institution allows, but to maintain those touch points, to talk beyond the operational issues. For anyone that is a manager or budding manager or coordinator, I challenge you to know all of your staff's kids' names. Because it's an important thing. You need to connect with people on that level if you intend to lead. The other things that mentorship through one-to-ones can do is build trust and nurture a culture of continuous reflection. Remember this, the point of this one-to-one is to reflect. From a leadership or budding leadership perspective, it also supports you in recognizing your talent and helps you with succession planning. If you've got in mind that, yes, okay, we'll need a head teacher down the line, we'll need a coordinator who's going to replace me when I move on to bigger and better things, it allows you to identify where that talent is. And just lastly, it imbues your own and your institution's culture and values. Goal setting. So throughout that process, you'll set goals. You'll say, okay, I've discovered that I'd like to get a bit better at feedback, or I'd like to get more efficient at giving feedback. I'd like to develop, a set of pieces of advice or worksheets or websites or resources that I can easily and quickly refer my student to because they have problems with XYZ. So, these are where these exciting things can happen. It keeps everyone, I guess, interested and motivated and really engaged with what they're doing. La Trobe College Australia is a member college of Navitas, so many colleges are. There's probably some of you here. Hello to my colleagues. And you'd be familiar with this document. So this is our own performance development review document, and it incorporates some of the strategic, how can I say, goal setting elements that we hook onto, I guess. So the point of goal setting, I also want to say, is yes, it's for personal and professional development, but it can't just be siloed off from the rest of your entire operation, right? So if, for instance, number 3, deliver exceptional student experience and outcomes, is the goal that we want to address, then how is what you're doing contributing to that? And it may be in a small way, but you and your other teachers and your other colleagues and your coordinators and academic managers and DOSs are all doing this. And the sum of those many hands makes for a much lighter work. So, what are the benefits of incorporating the TiDF? What I will say is that it's led to a more motivated workforce. People are motivated toward their goals, they're sufficiently challenged, they're enjoying their work life a little bit more, I'd like to hope. It's contributed to a really positive work culture. And that's not to say that the work culture wasn't positive when I arrived at my current workplace or any place prior to that, but it's the kind of work culture that I want to work in. And we as humans, we spend, a fair amount of hours in our day in our workplaces more than we do with our own families. So we need to make it in the image that we'd like to be a participant in. And lastly, it's driven innovation. So I've been really pleasantly pleased to see all of the incredible initiatives that my team has started to develop. Things like our AI modules, our learning support functions, the different workshops that we offer, the study tours that we're starting to do. So it's become a really interesting and dynamic place to work. And for that, I have to say, I'm really grateful. So I'm going to open up to some questions now. I'll stop presenting and I will take a look at the sorry, chat box, and we'll go from there. So just checking if I've got any questions in the chat box. Where have I put it? Ooh. I'm not 100% sure if I'm seeing any questions in the question
No,
box.
I don't think there's any questions yet in the chat or in the Q&A.
Okay, sure. If anyone does have any questions, please feel free to put them in. Is there any areas that I can focus on or I can explain again, or give a bit more detail on that you think would be helpful, Sophie, maybe?
I had a quick question about, so you, firstly, thank you very much. And yeah, it's really inspiring to see the focus on safety and support at the heart of these processes. And, just the way that you've presented these, different processes that we're all very familiar with, one-on-ones, observations, but you've come at it from a slightly different perspective, and how much of a difference that makes to workplace culture. So yeah, thank you very much. I guess my question was around how it all fits together. So you outlined the 4 different elements of the framework. And is it something that, everybody goes through the 4 elements once a year, or how do you present this to new staff when they first start, and how do they know what the expectations are of them around the framework?
Sure. Good question. So yes, look, I'll have to admit it's still in its infancy. It's only been going for a year and a bit.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things I'm still not 100% solid on myself. What I've tried to aim for is, so our student experience surveys, they happen once every term. We have 9 of those a year. So that just goes on as it does. The observations, my view is that they should be an annual thing.
Yep.
I anticipate and I understand, and any other DOS or AM in the room is like, no way I have time for that. I get it, but you don't have time not to do it. So my view is that this is an annual cycle. So throughout most organizations, we do the PDL, the performance development process,
Yep.
as an annual cycle, and that involves 1 or 2 annual check-ins.
Yep.
So within that cycle, you might have, the first half of the year where you'll collect, unobserved observation data, and then the second half of the year where you'll be able to collect more about the student experience and observed data. And so throughout that, one-to-one that happens in that 1 year, you're able to look at all of those things at the same time. So it is iterative, and it's still, it's in progress and in change and very much in its infancy. But the early signs have been really positive.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. So, I wanted to maybe also explain a little bit more about psychological safety, care, belonging, inclusion, those sort of elements. So, as we all experienced throughout the challenging years that we had, but also since then, I think in general, in teachers that I speak with around the country, they mention that students do struggle a little bit more. They perceive that they struggle a little bit more than they once did, with a whole host of things, and that can be, mental health challenges, or it can be identity issues, or those sorts of things. So the really great thing that I think came out of that experience in working through challenging times was that we did put cotton wool around each other, and we put cotton wool around our students. And I say cotton wool, we didn't coddle them, but we supported them, and we made sure that students were joining in on those check-ins and having conversation club and doing all of those things that kept them engaged with us. Just because the ESOS requirements went back to 20 hours face to face is the rule, doesn't mean that all of those things should fade away. All of that innovation, all of that care, and all of that development that we've made in ensuring that our students are psychologically safe, feeling cared for, feeling that they belong, should become a part of our ordinary way of doing things. And that way, our students do develop more confidence, and they, we always, tend to say, oh, students back then used to be more resilient. We were working from a different place. We didn't have the same challenges then as we do now. Students today, also in the generation Gen Zs that we're dealing with, and Alpha beyond them, they didn't have to contend with body image through their phones at 6 years old. So these are different issues and a different set of humans that we are attempting to educate. And I appreciate that, we're just language teachers is what we might think, but we're educators. And educators have a responsibility on this earth, I believe, to help educate the future generations. So I'll get off my soapbox now, sorry.
No, I completely agree with you on that one. Absolutely. All right. Well, it doesn't appear that there are any questions. So I think it was all extremely clear and well presented. So we really appreciate you sharing your expertise and experiences with us today. Thank you so much again for your time and your insights and for all of the practical ideas that you've given us to take forward into our own work.